Hi, Nikki.
Hello.
Hello. So, you are a trauma recovery coach specializing in religious trauma, cult involvement, and narcissistic abuse. Did I get everything?
You did.
Great. Okay. Well,
hmm
thank you so much for joining me today. I learned something from you about cult hopping. What is cult hopping and is it common?
Well, thanks so much again for inviting me on. I'm so glad that you're doing the work that you are doing in this field because it's definitely necessary. Basically, what it is when a former cult member immediately following their departure from one cult, they sometimes eventually go to another cult.
Mhm.
And it's not always immediately. Sometimes people take a break, but then they also end up going back into a cultic dynamic. And there are several reasons as to why that could be. When former cult members leave their cults, a lot of times it's not because they want to. It's
Mhm.
because they have to, because the
Mhm.
situation got so dire, so abusive, so traumatizing, where they couldn't take it anymore and they had to leave. It's kind of like an abusive relationship or someone that's in a domestic violence relationship. They still love the person, but the love is toxic. And so
Mhm.
they know they need to get to safety, but they're torn. It's almost like the Stockholm syndrome. When it's like that, the ability to grieve, to have closure, it's not there. It's open ended. And many cult survivors, as they leave and they exit, they're stumped. They don't know what to make of themselves. Their identity is lost. Many of them were codependent on the cult leaders and the system at large. And so when they exit, basically in a state of shock. And to their nervous system, that doesn't feel good. To life and trying to go back out and acclimate themselves in society, that doesn't feel good. And so oftentimes, just out of, okay, I'm not in that cult, but maybe I can go here. They don't really know me. I can start fresh and, I can be there and it could still fill that void because, like I said,
Mhm.
that have to piece means they left without getting their belongings out the house almost. They left, so rapidly that they didn't get a chance to say goodbye to some of these relationships. So that desire for belonging, that desire for community, that desire for spiritual and religious guidance is still remaining. And so many oftentimes, they just go to another place. I know within some communities, particularly the minority community, and me growing up in the Black church, it was basically branded on us, so to speak, metaphorically, that, to be out of church is to be outside of the will of God. To be out of church is where now you are in the enemy's territory. You're in his playground and you'll become prey if you're not in the house of God. And so for me, when I cold top, that was something, an underlining notion that spoke to me. I need to be in the house of God. I need to be somewhere. So I rushed the process because of the previous reasons, but also because I did not want to be out of the will of God. And so
Mhm.
there are so many reasons why people get pushed into that arena to find something quickly. But as far as it being a common phenomenon, statistically and as far as data, this field, the cultic studies field, is still very, very new. And a lot of data has not been obtained at this point about particularly cult hopping. A lot of the data is not there because a lot of cult survivors are not saying, hey, let me take a survey, let me tell you about my experience in a statistical way. So
Right.
on paper there's not a lot of data, but
Mhm.
I can basically say, as much as I talk to different cult survivors, lead support groups and things of that nature, this happens more often than people think. And again, a big reason why is people want to fill those voids. They want to belong. They want to feel accepted and acknowledged and loved. And one more area as to why people they would leave a cult group and go right to another and cult hop. They're not in the place to process what just happened. If you think about that girlfriend that you went to college with, and she went from one relationship to another relationship to another relationship, and you're like, girl, slow down. Don't you want to take a break and process? And she's like, no, I don't want to think about it. That's behind me. A lot of times that's an indicator that people's nervous system are just not ready to
Mhm.
deal with the reality of everything. They're not ready to see what they thought was truth and now realizing that it may be a lie.
As a person who has experienced religious trauma and relationship trauma, this sounds so
Mhm.
much like the cycle I used to be in with one toxic relationship to the next toxic relationship because I didn't understand the dynamics of my previous toxic relationship. So I was
Yeah.
just repeating that cycle. So I would imagine that one person who's already left one cult group joins another, they don't realize that that's what they're doing. So
Mm-mm.
how would one know the difference between a cult group versus maybe a group that could be helpful to them and isn't a cult?
Vetting any type of community, especially, spiritual and religious ones, I think the key aspects are to think about safety.
Mm-hmm.
Can I be safe here? And
Mm-hmm.
not just on paper. Does my body feel safe here? Because you
Mm-hmm.
can go on the website of a group and they have all the trimmings and everything looks beautiful and it sounds great. It sounds very chat GPD, cheap GPT. But when you get there, something just does not feel right. Pay attention to that. And sometimes people say, well, I don't have receipts for why it doesn't feel right. So I'm just
Mm-hmm.
going to ignore it. That was me. And that's how
Yeah,
I
me
got
too.
another reason why I got into five posts. But now I wait and I say, okay, ding, 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 ding. There's something here. It could be me, but I'm not going to always assume that. I used to assume, oh, that's just me and just bypass everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now you wait, you look for receipts, you observe, you critically think, you pause, you slow down. Can I have my agency? Can I be autonomous in this group?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning like, can I grow and flourish and individuate, or is it
Mm-hmm.
predicated on the leadership and what they say and what they think? Does the leadership engage in power and control dynamics? Are they leading with because I said so? Does it have that authoritative feel? And sometimes it doesn't have that feel initially because you might be dealing with a covert narcissist where
Yes.
it is, very subtle. One of the major cults I was in, the leader, he never yelled. He never screamed.
Mm-hmm.
He never yelled. He was very even kill, very monotone, seemed very humble. And on paper, you wouldn't think that they were a cult leader, but you have to pay attention to your body, pay attention and observe the different things. And so there's no perfect church. But when you look at, okay, is this a church? And I often think about it on a spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
kind of almost like narcissism. You may have a particular group of community and it's low, meaning like it's not perfect, meaning like every now and then the leader or the structure of the institution may have some things that you don't like, but you still have your autonomy. There's still safety. It's just, I don't like this. Okay, observe, keep it moving. Don't assume that just because that's how you entered in, that that is
Mm-hmm.
how it remains. These
Mm-hmm.
type of communities evolve.
Yeah.
They don't always stay the same. Sometimes they evolve for good, sometimes they don't. And so don't think, well, because they always been right, that they can never go wrong, or always been right, they can never go left. And if that starts to happen, observe because it may start moving into the more moderate traits with the leadership, where
Mm-hmm.
now they didn't teach as much about surrendering and obeying and dying to self, but now you're hearing it like every Sunday. Either that or you're
Mm-hmm.
hearing more about if you don't give, curses will come upon you. You start hearing certain rhetoric that is a sign. Some people say, hey, I'm out of there, but some people
Mm-hmm.
may say, not just yet, let me see, because I will give them some benefit of the doubt. They were
Mm-hmm.
low, but now they're starting to be moderate. And then that moderate to high is now you're not just hearing about these teachings, you're being reprimanded publicly,
Mm-hmm.
publicly shamed as an adult, if you will, with probably spouses and families and everything. You're hearing things from the leadership, you're being called into the office. Why aren't you tithing? What's going on with your finances? Are you
Right.
being obedient to God? And so
Mm-hmm.
you start to see certain topics and markers. Is there a worship of the leadership from everybody that if you
Mm-hmm.
don't, you're in fear? So you start looking
Mm-hmm.
for certain traits. So I don't know if I fully answered the question, but hopefully I'm giving enough information for people to see,
Absolutely.
what it looks like for it to progress.
I thought of something while I was listening to you. Sometimes we forgive something that we shouldn't forgive because, nine times before this 10th time, this person was really good. And I've made decisions like that based on a person's past without realizing, oh, wait, they're slipping. They're showing their true colors. So something that I learned was, okay, I'm not going to cut somebody off the first time they rub me the wrong way, but I'm not going to
Right.
just push it out of my mind either. I've learned over time that you have to pay attention to those moments because
Yeah.
most likely it'll get worse. That you'll see
Yeah.
more and more of that side of a person with time.
hmm
Do you
hmm
agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we do, and especially people who've been in relational trauma, spiritual abuse, religious abuse. Many of us are empathic.
Mm,
Many of us, it's so easy to give the benefit of the doubt over
hmm.
and over again.
Oh, I
Oh,
know.
that's not what they're a leader. Why would I think that? Leaders, teachers, political officials, it's
Oh,
very
yeah.
easy to give them moms, dads. Very easy to give these type of roles the benefit of the doubt just because of the status of the role in and of itself.
Right.
But hopefully, we are in a time where people can see that's not enough. You can
Hmm.
still be severely emotionally and spiritually damaged if you don't pay attention to the signs and not just pay attention, but move accordingly after you see. Because that was my
Absolutely.
thing. I saw it, but I just, it's a nothing burger. It's just me. They're the man and woman of God, and I just let everything go. I don't do that now, but
Right.
that's what I did, and that's such a disservice to who we are and being able to maintain our safety and autonomy.
Totally agree. I know because that's exactly what I used to do. But I've learned, I've
Hmm
grown.
Me too. Me too.
That's why we're here, right?
Uh-huh.
So can can aspects of a person's early life, their childhood, the way they were raised, make them more susceptible to joining a cult group later in life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes people say, these cult leaders or, abusive type of people can kind of it can smell us, so to speak, or there's this energy. They're like, aha, and especially if they hear our stories. And I think I don't know the polling. I know there is some data out there. I don't know it off the top of my head, but a lot of cult survivors, spiritual abuse, religious trauma survivors often have a history of developmental trauma. And oftentimes it's from the abuse within their childhood setting. And when people ask me, hey, Nikki, what was the biggest thing that you had to get through with your recovery? I don't know if I would say it was the biggest, but it was the most advantageous and it was the most gut wrenching part, which was I say, if you're on the beach and you pull that string and it just goes all the way back. I mean, you have your own experiences within the religion
Mm,
dynamic and the cult dynamic. Now
mm,
you're telling me I have to go back and look at what happened in my family of origin. But I can honestly say that that was one of the biggest keys for me to start breaking these cycles so I was not in a sixth cult. I was,
yeah.
next year I will be 10 years cult free. And a big
Wow.
part of that was, and I'm giving it away, I'll say it again later, but a big part of that was due to the psychoeducation, but also because I took the courage to turn around behind me and face my past and face
Right.
the unmet needs from childhood dynamics that often led me to look for these different type of cult experiences. It was not my fault what was
Mhm.
done to me, but
Right.
it's helpful to see the parallels and how I got to those places and those experiences.
I had the same experience myself where, like I
Hmm
said, I was in that cycle of religious abuse, relationship abuse, even friendships,
hmm hmm
until I really started going back, looking at my early childhood and seeing what brought me to this point. Whereas before that, I felt like I didn't really have the time or the space to do that until it
hmm
became completely unavoidable.
Yeah.
And that's right. And that's
Yep.
what really spurred on a lot of change in my life.
hmm
So, are there religious beliefs? We did touch on it a little bit already, but are there religious beliefs and ideologies that people are taught that makes them more susceptible to joining a cult group or having that cult mindset?
Oh, absolutely. I know that we're talking to the general public who are inquiring about cult dynamics and even cult survivors, but I want to specify being a Black woman, a minority, and being raised in a Black church. And some of these teachings, not just the Black church, but a lot of this in other churches too, some of these teachings within my family system
Mhm.
created a template, created an imprint so that when I went to these different places, I was attracted to and I was attracted by these cult leaders because of a lot of these teachings. And so I would say the authoritarian God belief
Mm,
system. Not that he's just the God that loves you, but he's the God that you should fear.
mm,
Emphasis on fear. He's easily angered, he's vengeful, he's
mm.
ready. Black community, God will send you to hell. And so you hear that constantly. You start to create a fear of God, that he's, this God that's ready to judge. He's often displeased with anything you do. So you're constantly trying to chase on this wheel of, did I do it enough? Did I cross all my T's and dot all my I's? And so this God is presented in the family system, in the Black community. And for those that are like, I'm not Black, but I can relate. Yes, yes, it's not just in the Black community, but this constant displeasure that God has with us, that God is obsessed with obedience, even over relationship. I love you,
Right.
but you did not fulfill these things on this list. Therefore, I'm sending you to hell, or therefore I'm removing myself from you. And I'm going to judge everything you do to make sure if you want to get back in good graces with me. And so those type of teachings and that belief system was embedded in me before I stepped foot in my first cult. It was in my
Mm,
family system. And then obviously there's teachings regarding surrendering and submission and dying to self and counting it all loss, for Christ. And a lot of this, what it does is suppresses our intuition.
yeah.
It suppresses our ability to trust within ourselves, because that those teachings constantly cause someone to erase themselves. I don't
Mm,
exist. If I do exist, I exist to erase myself, because then I can please God, or I can please the leader, or I can please my authority figures that I grew up with. Then there's the black and white thinking, us versus them. You either for God or against God. There's no gray. You're either
mm,
saved or you're lost. You're either
mm.
holy and I can connect with you, or you're profane and I have to judge you and back up from you.
Right.
So there's no space for nuance. It can cause a fear of outsiders or people that don't fit in, the type of group that we're in. Definitely a lot of elitism, because
Yes.
I'm doing all this work to stay in good graces with God and you're not. I'm looking down on you. And so then this is the big one for me because of the type of cults I was in. But fear based eschatology, which is the study of end times and apocalyptic teachings,
Yeah.
that's how I kind of got saved. Even though I was raised in church, I got saved going down the rabbit hole and reading a lot of conspiracy theory books and end time stuff. And so end time theology, rapture teaching. I don't know if a lot of people are aware. A lot of these teachings have caused people, there's a term, rapture anxiety.
Yes.
There are
Yeah.
people that are having, visible triggers because they're in the house by themselves and they don't know where their family members or their loved ones are. And they're thinking, is this the moment? Has the rapture happened? Have I been left behind? And that creates a state of paranoia. It can create hypervigilance where your nervous system is always on alert, always, ready to look for every threat. These are just some teachings. There are a host of different teachings, but this creates this template so that when you see a cult like the one I was a part of, that was end time and very mission minded, very elite, very obey the leader, very the authority and the leadership is who hears from God, and then they
Yeah.
pass it on to you. So it was very easy for me just to segue right into it. It felt so familiar to
Yeah,
me.
so interesting. I grew up Baptist. It's ingrained in me to fear the rapture. I no longer believe in the rapture now that I know where that theology actually comes from. But when I was a teenager, if my air conditioner in the window made a funny sound, I used to think it was the rapture and Jesus was coming back. That the degrees of trauma, and that
Yeah.
trauma stays with you even after you change your views. I would take the teachings or the cut and paste teachings that they taught us about the rapture so literally that I would check to see if my twin sister was still in her bed because we shared a bedroom because the
Uh-huh.
Bible said there will be two and one will be taken. And so
Okay.
if she was still in her bed and we were both there, then I was like, okay, good. The rapture didn't happen yet. Now that I think back, that feels crazy. I mean, what is happening
Yeah.
to your brain while you're this scared, you know?
Right.
And something else that I thought of while I was listening to you is that I'm from a shame based culture. And
Hmm.
our culture is really impact the way we understand and interact with religion.
Mhm.
And I think each community has its own dynamic, but we all have a dynamic, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
being from a shame-based culture and then growing up fundamentalist Baptist, at least until I was about 14, that had
Hmm.
a huge impact on how spiritually codependent I had been throughout most of my life. Does
Yes.
that make sense?
No, absolutely. And you're speaking like you're talking about those adolescent years, but even with the rapture teaching, you're speaking to, that early childhood ages where a lot of parents allow their children to ingest the Left Behind series as far as the books and the movies and make them watch these and engage in this paraphernalia that talks about end times. So it's already as you are individuating in those early childhood years, this is being fused in with who you are. And so,
Mm-hmm.
of course, as an adult, some of these things would still be in our bodies,
Oh, yeah.
somatically showing up. Sometimes I wonder, I don't know if parents understand the psychological impact that it has on a child to have them be introduced to these type of topics. Or sometimes I wonder, do they understand and they don't really care because in their mind, the religion and the tenets of the religion and the teachings are paramount in
Yeah.
comparison to their children. They need to do this anyway because if they're going to be going to heaven and being saved, they're going to have to get it anyway. So why don't they get it early? And that's
Mm-hmm.
they don't realize it does such a disservice. Children having nightmares, can't sleep. It's not a good thing. That's a whole nother topic. Religion and religious teachings and family systems, how
Mm-hmm.
parents actually use their belief systems and they introduce it to their children. Unfortunately, many of them do it in an abusive way, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think a lot of people don't realize it. They think they're doing the right thing while they're actually
right,
hurting their children. Yeah.
right, right, absolutely.
So we're speaking about the family dynamic, but when we look at our country, the United States, from a broader sense, do you find that our current political climate here in the United States has a relationship with fostering and or expanding the cult mindset?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know if I should say this on record, but I don't care. I'll say it. Like
Yeah,
my
let's just say it.
little,
Yeah.
no, I know my little jokes. Like I have to laugh at some things, otherwise, I'll cry. But I often talk about this is not the United States of America anymore. It's the United Cult of Trump.
Yeah.
So we are, whether people, some people are like, wow, you were a cult? You were in a cult? That's interesting. That's wow. And I don't think people realize we are all in a cult right now in America. There are
Yeah.
markers left and right. You can tell from the changing of seeing right before our very eyes democracy being eroded,
Mm.
authoritarian control, freedoms and rights being taken away from the citizens. Paranoia is at an all-time high with
Mm-hmm.
immigration and just different things, attack against those with a different sexual orientation
Mm-hmm.
or those who are legally a part of this nation. There is the eroding of the balance of power between the three branches of government, the executive, judicial, and legislative branch, and everything being basically pushed through the executive branch and the office of the president. For me, this is very disheartening and a whole lot of adjectives I could use. But for me, because I came out some of the cult systems that I was in the prayer meetings when they prayed
Mm-hmm.
for some of the stuff that we're seeing being implemented now. I was connected with some of these leaders who had these lofty visions, which I now call delusions.
Mm-hmm.
For the God is saying this is how this country should be, and that, and so they are connected with a lot of the lobbyists and the people in the Heritage Foundation, and those people are connected to our current president and the administration, and they are the ones that are crafting this version of the United States that is very authoritative, very fascist. I'm trying to be nice in my vernacular, but there are very, very blaring cult markers. And,
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage people, whether you've been in a cult or not, to at least research and know and be able to observe and understand some of these dynamics.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't have to be nice. You can be as open as you
Okay,
feel
good, good,
comfortable
good.
being. I'm not going to tell you to be
Okay.
nice. I don't believe in all of that. I say just be honest. Say it like you see it,
Okay,
you
that's
know?
right. That's right. No, because
So,
I could really say it, but I try to be diplomatic in how I express it.
okay.
Hmm.
So, what impact do you think that the internet or social media may have on this expanding and fostering of a cult mindset?
It's big. It's big.
Hmm.
You know, when people think about cults, they think of a compound
Hmm.
or a particular church or
Hmm.
building, right?
Hmm.
A brick and mortar place where people gather under worship of a said leader or an ideology. But I would say it's 2025, and I think people need to expand their version of what a cult looks like.
Yeah.
And I would say part of that expansion has a lot to do with what's happening online. You
Hmm.
know, they didn't have to rent out the brick and mortar store and gather people. They can just videotape themselves and speak right to the void, and then the people come. And I've seen an influx over the past, I would even say 5 years. I've really seen it more of content creators and internet influencers. Cults are not only religious,
Yes.
not only spiritual, you have religious cults, you have cults in the new age and spiritual community, in the yoga wellness community, you have
Hmm.
cults in the political realm, you have sex cults, you
Yes.
have cults in the conscious community. There are many
Yes.
in the minority community who are still looking for truth of who they are, how they derived in this nation, if you will. What's the origin story? So much, especially in the Black community, has been whitewashed. And so there are many who are looking for someone tell me who I am and how I can evolve even more into being that person. And so all you have to do is go on Instagram or TikTok,
Mhm.
and it's very easy to get connected with a charismatic person, or with that question connecting with the previous question, all you have to do is go on YouTube and watch someone, you know, spew out the same rhetoric that I used to hear in a lot of these cults I was involved in that were Christian nationalists in nature. And next thing you know, you're believing this ideology, you're supporting this ideology, you take it a step further, and now you are very demonstrative, maybe in your city and your town with this ideology, and you may get just as violent as the next person with it now. And so the internet, social media has pushed, I would say, cult dynamics further and faster than it
Mhm.
has been in the old days, which it's even more imperative for
Mhm.
people to be educated about cult dynamics, about coercive control, about manipulative tactics, and things of that nature for themselves. There's no assumption, oh, I will never be in a cult. I mean, a lot of people can pride themselves that way, but I don't think that's what I set out to do. I don't think you set out to go through the
Mhm.
experiences you went through. You
No, of
know,
course
we
not.
thought we were getting community that was loving and loved God,
Mhm.
and we got something totally different. And so, cults and people who are part of cults, there's the myth that, oh, it's for the traumatized, the uneducated, the naive. And there are
Mhm.
so many susceptibilities to being in cult dynamics. And there's doctors that have been in cults, and
Yep.
actors. And, you know, you think of the Nexium cult, many actors. You think of Scientology, many famous actors and
Yep.
actresses have been a part of these cults. So no one is cult exempt. This season that we're in, especially going into 2026, I don't know, maybe someone that's, you know, reading this or hearing this and saying, you know what, maybe it's time for me to learn more about
Yeah.
this to protect myself, my family, but also to know what's going on in my nation.
And with the internet, how much does the loneliness epidemic
Yes.
intersect with social media indoctrination?
Yes, I mean, the lonely epidemic, I think, is global, but
Hmm.
especially over here in America, there are a lot of reasonings as to why. But I know for a lot of people, when they can't meet people or connect with people in person, the internet is becomes their family. It
Yeah.
becomes where they get their information from, where they get their connections from. And just like in a brick and mortar cult, people go to these places because they're looking to belong.
Yeah.
They're looking to be guided. Some people are like, you know what? I'm going through a lot of hardship right now. I need some spiritual guidance, some religious guidance. Therefore, this person online, I like them. They're kind of meeting those needs. And that's another thing to bring back to the original question in the beginning. about cult hopping, my hopping was not all brick and mortar.
Hmm.
One of those cults was online. And
Wow.
so people think, oh, okay, well, I'm not in the building anymore, so then I'm safe.
Yeah.
Well, the internet is many of buildings, if you will, many connections. There are a lot of charismatic leaders and personalities that are on the internet. And if you're not careful, you can go from this is what I think about a subject to 6 months later. Well, brother so and so says this all the time, and sister so and so. When I go and follow her, I always feel like I belong and I'm seen and everything. And so your language is changing now. And
Mm.
now, your validation is coming from external forces rather than from within. And so
Yes.
it's very imperative that people be mindful when they're engaging on the internet and, social media content, especially now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's so interesting with the internet and social media. It's such a double-edged sword because on one end, it helps speed up cult mindset, indoctrination, cult recruiting. But at the same time, I do credit the internet largely for what helped break me out of where I was at
Yes.
because there's also a lot of very responsible people and professionals
Hmm.
saying these things, and it helped collectively, I believe, all of us increase our consciousness about these
Yeah.
issues. So it's
Yeah.
funny how it can work either way.
I think that balance is the operative word here
Yeah.
because just like you, it was very beneficial to me. My early days coming out of my last cult, I went to therapists and they helped me with my, acute PTSD at the time, but
Mm-hmm.
they weren't knowledgeable nor had any expertise about cult dynamics. So I had to do my own homework. That's when the
Yeah.
internet did help me. That's when
Mm-hmm.
resources did help me. I think the key is how to hold these things,
Yeah.
how to touch these things and not become these things is
Mm.
part of the process. And being aware your inner compass of, am I gleaning information and it's beneficial? But at the end of the day, it stops with me, what I think, what I feel, what my choice and decision making power is, and connecting with that above anything you start to receive. So I think, for people that need to connect with your website or other resources out there on social media, do it. But also be mindful to come back home to yourself.
Yeah.
No one can tell you like you. I don't, not a therapist, not even mom and dad or
Right.
spouse or son or child. It's you. And so
Mm.
a lot of cults like to demonize our internal world, but that's where the safety is. That's where the wisdom and the guidance is. And so, yeah, read those books, read those blogs, look at those posts. But at the end of the day, you weigh it out for yourself above all.
Absolutely. And anybody who says otherwise, in my opinion, is a walking,
That's
talking
right.
red flag.
That's right. That's right.
So you are a five-time survivor. You were a part of five cults, and you've left five cults, and you've been cult-free for 10 years, which I think is amazing. So how did you get involved with your first cult, and how did it impact you?
I almost consider my first cult my family of origin, or put a little asterisk there because that's where the template was formed and everything.
Hmm.
But growing up as a child and an adolescent, I had my interest in beginnings. My family says, yeah, I wasn't listening. I was a little bad girl. And so my first year in college, I started to hear these terms about the New World Order. There was a
Mm.
song by this rap group called the Goody Mob, and the song was called "Who's That Peeping in My Window?" And I loved the beat, and I was with some friends. I was like, "Oh, I like this song." And
Hmm.
so one of them said, "But do you know what they're talking about?" And I said, "No, listen again." And so I started listening, and then I had questions. Started to get curious, and that's kind of how I started to learn about the New World Order and
Mm.
all of this Illuminati stuff. But those topics always led me back to certain books in the Bible:
Mm.
Revelation, Ezekiel, Daniel, the apocalyptic end time books. And
Mm.
so I got saved from this experience of researching and going to the Bible and realizing, okay, well, seems like Jesus, you're the only way out of this mess that's coming. So I guess I'll get saved. I know that sounds crazy, but I connected that part of my life and that experience from fear. It was fear
Mm.
based. It wasn't God loves me, he wants to help me come into my heart. This was in my basement where I was like, look,
Mm,
I don't have no options. If you're gonna be real, show me you're real. At that point, I really started to take it seriously. I stopped hanging out, started really getting serious with reading the Bible. And then I met a group of young people when I went to a service one time at a church, and I was like, wow, they're like around my age and they're serious. And this is what I need if I'm going to really do this thing. So I'm not left behind, then I
mm,
need to really commit. And so I connected with them, started visiting their church, and I was just wowed. And I was like, this is my tribe. This is home. And it was predominantly Black, a small storefront church, I would say about 100 or less. And I really fell in love with the leadership, the music, the
mm,
messages, the community, and that desire for me to have spiritual parents, a spiritual mother and spiritual father in the faith, because I had that need from my, narcissistic family system. And so it's like everything's here. I'm going to join and become a part of it. As I got involved and loving everything and really connected to the leadership, I thought it was a church. But shortly thereafter, towards the end of my experience, I realized I was in a cult. Well, I didn't realize I was in a cult really until after I left. I just left knowing this is really toxic.
yeah.
And so that's kind of like how I joined that cult. But I cut my teeth on worship that was very demonstrative and lively,
Mm,
and intercession and prayer and end times. And so even though once I left, I eventually went to another church, it wasn't fulfilling to me. It didn't
mm,
satiate me. I needed something like how I got in the beginning. And that led me on a journey to all these other more extremist type of cults.
yeah. So you did leave your first cult, and then in
Uh-huh.
time you eventually joined another cult.
Hmm.
So what has your personal experience been like with cult hopping?
Well, again, like, I did not know that that's what I was doing. And it's not
Mm,
even the term. If you just think about it from the analogy I gave you earlier with a friend that you see going from one relationship to another, we don't say, well, we could say relationship hopping. Maybe sometimes people use that term, but I didn't know that that's what I was doing. Even,
of course.
consciously, I didn't know. Like I said, I had these teachings and these belief systems that would not let me see it that way.
Mm,
And so, even though I left that first cult, and it took time, and even me leaving that first cult, I spiritualized everything.
hmm.
So I'm looking in the scriptures for what I experienced. Is this a Jezebel spirit? Was this a religious spirit that I deal with? Do I have the spirit of Elijah on me? And that's why I had to, so I spiritualized it all. And it took getting physically violent to some degree for me to actually leave, because my daughter, who's in her 20s now, at that time, I had a child by the cult leader's son. We
Yeah.
were not
Oh,
married. So I went through a lot, even in that process of being at the cult. And it took me leaving with my child, her grandchild, in my arms as a baby, and her, physically pushing me down the steps and things of that nature, for me to say, okay, I really can't return here,
yeah.
because my personality at the time was endure like a good soldier, suffer everything for Christ. And so even though things were tough and toxic, I kept going back. I kept going back because I figured the enemy's not going to win. But it took something that severe for me to realize, Nikki, you can't be here anymore. I didn't want to leave. But I did leave. And then when I left and I find a church, what that was not a cult, but it wasn't enough. I wanted the
Mm,
glitz and the glamour and all the pizzazz. And so that church I went to for a little bit, but eventually I would leave and go to my second cult and actually move from the state where I was born in and move to Kansas City, Missouri, and attend the International House of Prayer in Kansas
mm.
City. And so, which is a big end time,
Oh, yeah.
cult as far as, their teachings and stuff like that.
First of all, that's horrifying that anyone, I mean, just violence alone, I don't understand how one adult person could put their hands on another
Right.
person
Right.
or another adult or a child. But
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm,
can't wrap my mind around that you're holding your child in your arms.
mm-hmm,
And I could
mm-hmm.
understand why that would be the bridge that was that one bridge too far.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm sorry that you had to go through something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the fact that it had to be so extreme. And even though that was physical, the subsequent cults, extreme things had to take place for me again to say, I can't be here. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and it's like in my work, because like I said, next year I'll be out 10 years or 10 years cult free. I've thought about that a lot. How the template might have been formed in my family of origin. I don't know. I don't want to put it all on that. But this type of temperament that would endure anything, right? Because that's how big my belief system was. Like, God, there is nothing I won't do for you. There's nowhere I won't go for you. And so when you are connected with toxic or cultic leaders and they see that on you, man, will they use that to their advantage. And so I was constantly eroded over and over again. And it had to be something so severe for me to kind of snap out of it. And the
Mm.
smelling salt comes to me, and I come to and say, oh, this is not safe. I need to leave,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? Yeah.
So how did you break the cycle for good?
Well, breaking that cycle, the last cult I was in was brick and mortar, but the more I would say impactful in a negative way cult was the fourth cult I was a part of. And once I realized the fifth cult, I wasn't a part of that as long because it was online. And I eventually, was like, I can't do this. I started to see I've been in five cults because when I was cult hopping, I didn't see it as that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I even saw them as cults. I saw it was cultish. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
the first one. Eventually, I saw the first one as cults, but not the other ones until I came out and I started reading and understanding and realized this is what I was in. And so, to break that cycle, the first and foremost part was the psychoeducation. I had to start reading. I had to get on the internet, as we mentioned before. I went online. I started reading books by world renowned cult experts, Dr. Stephen Hassan, Dr. Yanya Lalich, Margaret Sanger, Rick Allen Ross. There's a whole bunch of them. Robert J. Lifton, who they've written a lot of material around cults. And I started to educate myself. I didn't just spiritualize the experience anymore because
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was doing before. Where in the Bible speaks to what I just went through? And I would find a few scriptures and just say, okay, well, I'm out of that. The devil is a liar. I'm going to keep going. This
Mm.
time, I just said, I can't do that anymore. And even though psychology was demonized in, the places I was at and going to therapy was demonized, I was so broken
Mm.
I did not have a choice. I was
Right.
ill, I was not well, and I just was like, if Kermit the Frog has the answers, I will sit and listen to Kermit the Frog.
Mm.
And in the reading and in the watching and learning, I started to see, oh, this is how you break cycles. It's not just praying and fasting
Yeah.
and doing a whole bunch of worship. And for those who are still religious, I am not being facetious or belittling. Some of that might have had validity,
Mm-hmm.
but to me, it was understanding the psychological patterns, the conditioning, the indoctrination, all these things. And I started to get language for, but the bigger element that helped me to break the cycle, and I mentioned it before, is having enough courage to face myself,
Yeah. Yeah.
to face not just what the abuser did or the abusive teachings or the institution, but what did I come to these groups wanting,
Yeah.
needing desperately? What were the unmet needs that I was consciously not aware of, but I looked for that made me be prey to
Yeah.
these type of people? Yes, there was abuse. Yes, it was wrong. No, it was not my fault.
Right.
But what type of inner workings, unsatisfaction, things that I was hungry for on a soul level was present that caused me to gravitate to these places? What type of templates were formed in my family of origin? And that was hard because sometimes people feel like if I admit these things, then that means I did this and it was my fault. No, no, no. And I try to encourage people, no, that's not what we're saying, but both can be right and true at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. And
Mm-hmm.
once you take the courage and look at it and realize it's not your fault and have compassion towards yourself, that's when you can start doing that work and breaking this stuff up, you know. And I went to therapy, still a lot of therapy, even if they couldn't help me. I did not turn that away because I
Right.
knew I still needed some assistance, but I did
Right.
not wait for the therapist only
Right.
to help or fix me, which they
Right.
can't do anyway.
Right.
I did my own homework because I wanted freedom. And I got to the point where I said, I do not want the rest of my years on this planet to be marked by what I came out of.
Right.
It is a part of my story, but it is not my full story. And
Right.
I will reclaim everything I need to reclaim. I will explore and learn different things, but I am not going to allow that to take me out psychologically, emotionally, or whatever. I
Mm.
want my life back. So
That's right.
I fought like hell to make sure that I was okay and then to extend the same for my daughter while simultaneously allowing her to individuate and figure out what she wants next psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. Even I never had intention on doing this work. I did this for myself.
So much of what you shared stands out to me. One thing I always want to tell religious and spiritual people is don't be afraid of secular knowledge. And
Yeah.
it's not because I'm belittling anyone's faith. I am no longer a religious person, but I respect
Mm.
and honor each person's faith and their right to their faith. And I understand how meaningful their faith is to them. But
Yeah.
that shouldn't be a reason to be fearful or to avoid, ignore secular knowledge because that knowledge is what saved so many of us from these cycles.
Absolutely.
And something that really struck me while I was listening to what you're sharing is what so many people have said to me who come out of these toxic spiritual environments is that the whole time they were looking for an answer in the system they were raised in,
Uh-huh.
or in someone else, they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't find that answer. But like you said, when you started to break free and start doing your own research and your own
Mm-hmm.
study, and you stopped even waiting for a therapist to fix you, that's how you broke the cycle and found your
Yeah.
freedom. And that's my story too. And that's what I hear
Mm-hmm.
time and time again. No matter how
Mm-hmm.
many people I speak to
Mm-hmm.
that have been through something like this, that always seems to be the answer.
Yeah, and taking ownership of my life. I will put
Mm-hmm.
that as the third thing. And I just thought about that listening to you. Taking ownership of my life. And that was hard because I was very codependent on these leaders, on the
Yeah.
systems, on the teachings, even on God. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's a whole nother thing. People are codependent on God. Yes, I
Yeah.
wanted him to be, this knight in shining armor
Mm-hmm.
or, just Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Okay, let me write my list and you make it happen. When in essence, there are a lot of things in my humanity that I can do and take responsibility for. And so over time, that was a big healing component where I'm not looking outside, I'm looking within and I'm talking to me and my inner child and saying, we're going to do this. We're not waiting
Mm.
for so and so to come and save or this person. We're going to do this because we want our life. And like I said, I'm enjoying life now. I mean, I don't like the political climate. I do this work, but I don't talk trauma and cults all the time. I like to go to the
Mm.
movies. I like to go and travel. I like to have fun. And that is part of the healing
It
and
is.
breaking the cycle as well. Because sometimes we're so used to someone else telling us what the will of God is,
Mm.
or I don't know if I should take this job. Let me ask prophet so and so and see if they had a dream from God for me. And like, no, no,
Mm.
no. But see, again, that's how you set yourself up as prey. Because prophet
Mm-hmm.
so and so may not have it and can make something up, and now you are leading your life based off of what he's saying. And so those
Yeah.
type of behavior patterns, I have to stop those and start. Nikki, what do you think? What do you
Mm.
want? What do you choose? And being comfortable in my autonomy and my agency that I now had post
Mm.
cults.
And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to
It's
be wrong, even
okay
when
to
we go
make,
through that process.
yes,
And we're going to
yes,
change our minds over and over again, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail. It's okay to not know what you believe now or
Mm-hmm.
what you identify as now.
Mm-hmm.
I tell that to the groups I run, to the clients I work with. You don't have to, have any affiliation right now. You can
Mm-hmm.
just be. And you can decide if you never want an affiliation.
Right.
In that place is where you really start to learn yourself and to thrive.
That's amazing. So
Mhm.
you shared with me that you first started speaking about your experience on Clubhouse.
Uh-huh.
What made you decide to speak forward?
I did it afraid because up until my Clubhouse days, which was 2020 and
Mm-hmm.
2021, I didn't share that I was a part of one cult, let alone five cults, with hardly anyone. Only a few
Mm.
people knew, but that
Mm-hmm.
wasn't something I did publicly. I would say in 2020, I had a lot of health challenges that had nothing to do with COVID, and having a new lease on life, so to speak, after a lot of the health challenges. I don't know. It's just like all of a sudden, my no became, yeah, I think I need to do this.
Mm.
I've always felt, even when I was in the religious cult dynamics, that I need to be speaking or writing and sharing. So I was doing that on that side of the
Mm-hmm.
fence, so to speak. But when I post cult, I didn't want to do any of it. I was like,
Mm.
God, if you're here, if you're real, if you hear me, I don't want any gifts here. Take them all. I just want to be human. And for
Yeah.
a little bit, I was, and I enjoyed connecting with my humanity and what it did for me to see other people's humanity and value
Mm.
them, despite their religion, their orientation, their belief system. You could worship Satan and I could still have a cup of coffee with you. At least that's
Oh.
where I'm at right now. I kind of start seeing things differently, and I Clubhouse started and people started sharing about, religious narcissists and narcissism and the family dynamic and everything like that. I started sharing my story and people were reaching out to me like, okay, I think I went through that through too. I went through that too. Can you have your own room? I was so scared because I was like, I talk a lot, but I was afraid at that point not to speak in front of people. It's just we're pulling back the curtain. That's a very sacred time in our lives when we went through all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I started sharing little by little. I started getting comfortable. And eventually I realized, okay, I need to create a space here on Clubhouse to talk about this more. So I created a club, that's the language they had at the time, called Spiritual Abuse and Cults. Myself and other couple other people were on a team with me, and we ran rooms talking about all these type of topics. And sometimes the rooms ran from like 6 to 7 hours as we
Wow.
talked about all this. And people would come up on the microphone and start sharing their stories and say, I've never shared this a day in my life. Some people that were
Wow.
older, in their 60s and 70s, and said they went through stuff, but they could never share it with anyone because that wasn't the
Mm.
time.
Yeah.
That brought tears to my eyes. And so I realized, you know what? Maybe I need to be doing this a little bit more. And that's kind of how I
Mm.
got into coaching and facilitating small groups and speaking.
And you also started a podcast with some of your colleagues
Yes.
called Surviving the Black Church, and you started a
Mhm.
support group. What has your
Yes.
experience with that been like?
Yes, we're still trying to get season two out, but season one was awesome. It was myself and a couple other colleagues, and
Mhm.
season one is still out there on podcast platforms, so you can check it out. But in that process, people started to respond and saying, "You're speaking my story, you're sharing my
Mm.
story, but we need to talk. Like, is there a place where we can talk about this stuff?" And out of that, myself and my colleagues started a space on Meetup, the Black Religious Trauma Recovery Network, and we
Mm.
host twice a month topics around cults and spiritual and religious abuse within the Black community or the Black church. And we just came up on our 2-year anniversary for running that space. And so I've met a lot of awesome survivors, resilient survivors. I've
Mm.
learned from them just as much as I hope they learn from myself and my colleague. And
Mm.
so we're enjoying that because we realize the resources are very scarce in the
Yeah.
minority department, any minority,
Yeah.
and the experiences are different because
They
there's
are.
cultural aspects that are involved. And my heart is that all different types of minorities can have space where they can talk about the nuances within their culture and these dynamics because it's very important.
It's very
Yeah,
important. I
yeah,
think that's
yeah.
such an amazing thing that you're doing. So, what led you to make this decision? You did already touch upon it a little bit, but what led
Mhm.
you to making this decision to be a trauma recovery coach especially focusing on religious trauma and cult experiences?
Well, I mean, at first, a lot of this came out of sharing, like I said, in Clubhouse. And I realized, okay, I have a lot of experience, but I want some teaching and some expertise from a learned environment. I'm in a training right now to obtain a certification in cult dynamics from a prominent cult recovery specialist. Her voice is very prominent right now. And I'm in a training for that as well, constantly trying to hone in my skills, look at the research, look at the data that is being derived. But I felt like this is an untapped area at large. You know, there's a lot of resources, but it's still growing in the areas of sexual abuse or child abuse,
Mhm.
you know, and these are horrific abuses. All abuses are horrific, but religious abuse and cult dynamics, it's more insidious, it's more invasive. You can't see it with the naked eye. It's very easy to have these experiences and just go on with life and put it behind you. But the tentacles of the impact of the events that are still in our bodies still have some level of power over us until we start to pull these things up. And oftentimes, I encourage people to do that in a place of safety with a licensed mental health professional, first and foremost, and then a coach, a more specialist as myself. And I realized that this is in the season of my life right now, what I'm supposed to be doing to help bring support and help to humanity in this side on this my small little dot on the planet.
Mhm.
And because I know what it was like going through that journey and those five colds, the many years that I've been indoctrinated in all this, I know what it felt like to be alone, to cry, to not understand what's going on. And if I did understand it a little bit, share it with loved ones, and I was
Mhm.
judged and ridiculed, and you're
Mhm.
not forgiving enough. You don't have enough faith. You need to be more obedient. These type of things you hear, and people may love us, but they don't know how to ingest this type of topic unless they've been through it. And
Yeah.
so I think it's so important for survivors to connect with people who's been there
Yeah.
and done that, because you don't have to code switch. You don't have to over explain. You don't have to worry about necessarily being misunderstood. They
Yeah.
get it. They
Yeah.
get it. You know, and we often can finish each other's stories, sentences, so to speak, because they're so similar.
Mhm.
And there's that power of validation when you're around
Mhm.
other survivors of the shared experience, that you feel like, okay, I'm not in this alone. It's unfortunate that we all went through it,
Yeah.
but now I'm encouraged to go through it, you know, to recover because I'm seeing other people recover. And for the Black community, seeing this hardly any resources, I said, you know what, this is what I need to do.
Does it help you heal as you help others heal?
Sometimes people try to heal by healing others.
Mhm.
And I try to be very observant of that. You know,
Right.
the work that I do is the work that I do. And then I try to put a boundary there,
Yeah.
you know. And so, ways that I do that, I make sure I'm staying with the therapist. So, I have a therapist now, and
Mhm.
we work on my stuff. So, it's not all
Mhm.
about, you know, the Black community's issues and this or that, or, you know, like I don't get lost in that.
Mhm.
You know, my trauma is not my identity. It's not
Right.
who I am. It's what
Right.
has happened to me and how to work that out of my body and work through, you know, the psychological measures of, you know, developing new neural pathways and learning. Yes. But like I said, at the end of the day, I like to be Nikki. So I have people that keep me grounded. We do fun things, and
Mhm.
my life is not wrapped up in this work,
Right.
but I enjoy doing this work and supporting other people to know that you don't have to be buried under the debris of all that you've walked through. You can get support where people can help pull it off of you until you can arise and see, you know, your purpose and what you want to do post cults, and watch people fly, not watch people be dependent on me or my
Right.
words, but I give them the tools to lean on themselves. And that doesn't help me heal, but it encourages me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I love what you're
Hmm.
saying, that you're not trying to create an environment where people are going to be depending on you. The
Right.
first time I tried to get coaching, that was my experience. And I realized,
Hmm.
wait a minute, I'm back in
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
cycle. So that is the
Yeah.
huge red flag, right? So what advice do you have for people? Maybe they haven't been able to get a coach yet, they haven't been able to procure those kinds of resources yet.
Yeah.
So in their ability to do the best they can for themselves, what advice do you have for people who are currently deconstructing and also working on
Hmm.
their own healing?
Hmm. First thing I would say is take off the proverbial watch
Mm,
that says, I went through that 5 years ago, therefore I should be here on my journey. Or the
mm,
pressures of people saying, that happened 2 years ago. Are you still in that? Take off the watch. And 9 times out of 10, people put it there, not
mm,
necessarily you.
right.
It's going to take time. It's
Mm,
going to take time to walk through this. Doesn't have to take forever, but it's going to take time. Embrace this recovery journey from a place of, I will slow down and allow the resources, the knowledge to come in, hopefully connecting with a mental health professional, hopefully being able to all these different steps and things. I'm going to slow down and allow it to organically occur. I'm not going to try to rush through it just so I can tell my cousin, yep, I'm a believer again and I go to such and such church. We try to rush this process, and the healing often comes when we slow down. The healing also comes when we're able to forgive ourselves. You know,
mm.
I often say sometimes the forgive word, I call it the F word, depending on how it's used. I encourage people to forgive themselves more than I
Mm,
encourage people to forgive others. I am not against that perspective and that notion. I think it's really important, but oftentimes with this work, survivors will be quick to let me forgive my abuser. Let me forgive this person and that person who abandoned me. And I'm like, but did you process through how you feel
mm,
first? Did you get to the point where you got angry? What
mm,
you've been
mhm,
through, that anger piece is important to
yeah.
really authentically forgive. And many skip over that just for the sake of, well, the Bible says I have to forgive. Okay, let's step back from that. You want to forgive? Cool. What about turning in and forgiving yourself?
Yeah.
Sometimes people, it's too much because, like, but I did let this happen. And oftentimes it's not it's not us, but we don't know that. And so, taking the steps to really sit with ourselves, have compassion with ourselves and
Mm,
kindness, and
mm,
understanding when we're slowing down and we're on this recovery journey, it's not a straight line.
mhm,
It's highs and there's lows. There's
mhm,
epiphanies, and some epiphanies empower us, and you're like, yeah, I don't want to have that belief system anymore. And I shake it off. There are others that are more deep rooted,
mhm,
and it it evokes emotions sometimes of grief or shame
mm,
or loss, and we got to sit with them. When
mm,
that happens, sometimes, I look at shame and grief sometimes as actual people. That helps me.
mhm, mm,
So,
mhm,
grief is more quiet. Grief is like, I will always be here, but I'm going to wait for you. I'm not going to
mm.
force you. Shame is like, Nikki, you don't want to talk about that? All right, let's get the covers and let's put it over ourselves
Yeah.
and let's avoid, right? But when we can say, "Ooh, I realized this about myself. I've never realized that before." We don't judge and criticize ourselves. We have compassion. There are moments where I've had those, and I'm like, "Phew, this was a heavy one." Because I've learned some of these, these modalities, I will go to the mirror and put my hand over myself and I will look
Mm,
at myself and I'll say, Nikki, you did not know.
mm,
You couldn't have known. You did the
mm.
best you could with what you knew.
That's right.
This is not your fault. You are now learning that particular thing. It did incur some damage, but it's not permanent. It's temporary and there's a way out. So let's breathe, let's understand that happened, but this now can happen. And sometimes I cry. Sometimes I can't finish those statements, and especially if I'm looking myself in the mirror. But I
Mm,
do that so that I can face that particular thing that I need to work on versus running from it. And especially like you mentioned earlier, certain culture dynamics, and depending on what type of culture we're in, we're very shame based. So
Mm,
anytime we saw anything that was maybe a maladaptive coping mechanisms or it's not healthy or something is pointed out, we're quick to be like, oh, it's my fault. I want to hide, and just, shame will help you. Oh, here's your blanket. I'll put it over you
yeah,
instead of saying, you know what? No, I'm going to look at myself. You did not know, and it's
yeah,
okay. But we know now, and we'll take small steps. We're going to work through this,
that's
and so I have to do that a lot. I mentioned the impact of connecting with people who understand, who've been there. I think that's
right.
very important. I tell
Yeah.
people you may have 20 friends, but you may have one person that you don't even know that well. But you guys have been both through spiritual abuse. You've joined a support group and you've connected, and that may be the friend to help you in your next season of healing over all the 20. And that doesn't mean the
Yeah.
20 don't love you.
Right.
They just don't understand the complex trauma. It may take time for some, depending on where you are, but learning to embrace choice.
Mm.
When I first left all the cult world and I moved out of state and I got my apartment and my daughter, she had her room and she already knew her color. I'm going to design it like this and design it like that. And she came in, Mommy, what you going to design? What color you going to use? And I sat there and I cried because I couldn't even think for myself.
Wow.
I didn't know what color I wanted. I knew colors, but I didn't know what color I wanted. I was so used to deferring to the prophet
Yes.
or the cult leader or what's God's will? What color does God want me to have? And I'm not knocking when people do that. That's if you want to do
Mhm.
that, there's your discretion. But what does Nikki want? Thought about that hardly ever until that part came up. And so I slowly started to take measures and I would celebrate the small milestones. Today I chose chocolate ice cream instead of vanilla. It seems very, elementary, but learning to feel comfortable with choice, your own choice, not picking up the phone and asking so and so, not waiting for
Mm.
the prayer partner to tell you, not looking for the prophet to tell you, or sometimes not even looking for God to tell you.
Not
Sometimes
waiting for the voice of God to fall from
not waiting
heaven,
for the voice
right?
of God. I want to buy a new car and I want the color to be red. And
That's
that
right.
is not anti-God. That is humanity.
Right.
If you can get a mental health professional, a licensed one who understands cult dynamics, narcissistic abuse dynamics, religious trauma, that is awesome if you can. If not, a coach can actually help, especially ones
Mm.
who've been through, said experiences and can help you to see where you are and where you could go. And some of the heavy hitter things, obviously, I know I do. I refer out to a higher form of care. I don't try to take on what I'm not supposed to take on. Just not being hard on ourselves because the
Mm.
cult leaders were hard on us. On us. The teachings were hard. The family systems were hard and critical, and we learned to be hard on ourselves subconsciously without knowing. So now, as we heal, when those hands want to do this, they nope. I'm going to do this instead. And I'm going to be compassionate on myself. And, I'm going to be okay if I make a mistake.
That's right.
Try it again the next time. Normalizing these type of things. These cult leaders are not going to be the author of our entire lives. They're not writing that book. I get to write the book. I have the pen, not them.
Mm.
So,
Mm. Yeah.
so yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's it.
Well, that's amazing. How
Mhm.
can people find you?
Probably the easiest place is on my website, www.nikkiggspeaks.com. My socials are at the top right hand corner if you want to follow me on Instagram and Facebook. There's also a page on my website for those who want to check out the podcast and check out more about the support group for Black religious trauma survivors. I am currently working on an online community that is away from social media and supporting those who come out of a lot of these experiences, those who are dealing with the religious trauma being exacerbated because everything that's going on in the country. So, there's going to be a whole lot of things that are going to be curated in this online community. And so, if you want to know more about that, I would say subscribe to my website and I will send out paraphernalia about it as soon as it drops. We're looking towards the first couple of months of the year, opening the doors. So, That's the big project I'm working on now. Hmm.
Great. And I'll make sure that I put the URL for your website in the description.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
that I'll definitely do. Before we end, is there anything else you'd like to share?
I just like to always shout out those who have decided to get involved in this work, no matter what the medium is, podcasts, writing books, sharing their story, blogging, stepping into this space, going back to school and getting their license as a therapist or psychologist and touching this particular type of trauma and abuse. It's not an easy one. It's very complex. It's still very new. And I would say other countries are leading the charge
Hmm.
with a lot of this. The US is still a little bit behind. But as I said to you off camera, I just have so much excitement anytime I meet somebody new that's
Mhm.
saying, hey, this is what I want to contribute to this world. And I also tell people that are doing this work, it's not enough of us. So there's no
Yeah.
competition. It's not about
Hmm.
competition, it's about humanity and how
Mm.
can we heal from the darkness that exists
Exactly.
in this world. And so if you're out there and you're like, I want to do something about this, I'm a survivor, but I want to be an advocate or I want to be an activist, or maybe I should go back to school, think about it.
Mm.
Maybe some of you are in the areas of film and you want to make a documentary, go for it. There's not
Mm.
enough out there, in my opinion. Go for it because it is needed now. It was needed yesterday, and it's definitely going to be needed in the future, especially if you look at how things are going on globally right now. So, write that book, start that podcast, write the blog, start the film, whatever you need to do. Your voice is important and needed. There's room for you here in this field. So, that's
And we
it.
don't have to be perfect. We don't have to
We
be
don't have to
perfect
be
yet in
perfect.
order
Nope.
to contribute, right?
That's
In
right.
fact, we'll never
That's
be
right.
perfect.
No,
We'll
no,
always be on
no.
our journey.
No, no, we'll always be on a journey and it's okay.
Well, Nikki,
Mhm.
it's been great getting to know you. Thank you so much. I've learned so
Yes.
much from you, and I hope that we
Mhm.
collaborate again soon.
Yes, yes.